The invitation arrives on cream-colored paper, so thick it feels like fabric between my fingers. Villa Marguerite, it announces in elegant script, requests the pleasure of my company for an intimate dinner, celebrating the acquisition of a remarkable painting. The date is 3 days hence. The signature belongs to Monsieur Auguste Beaumont, no relation to the casino owner whose death I investigated just 6 months ago. Though the coincidence of names gives me pause, I set down my morning coffee and study the invitation more closely. The paper is expensive, the kind used by people who understand that quality announces itself quietly. The address places the villa in the hills above Nice, where the wealthy build their retreats to escape the crowds below. I have never heard of Auguste Beaumont, but the invitation suggests he knows of me. At the bottom, in smaller script, a curious addition. Your expertise in matters of authenticity would be most appreciated. Authenticity. An interesting word choice for an art collector. In my experience, when wealthy people speak of authenticity, they often mean its opposite. But perhaps I am being too cynical. The French Riviera attracts many legitimate collectors who appreciate beauty for its own sake. I walk to my study and place the invitation on my desk, next to the others in my collection. Each postcard, each letter, each formal invitation represents a moment when someone reached across the distance between strangers to request my help. This particular invitation intrigues me more than most. 3 days later, I dress carefully in my best dark suit and drive the winding road up into the hills above Nice. The evening is perfect. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the Mediterranean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Villa Marguerite sits on a promontory that commands spectacular views in all directions. The building itself is elegant without being ostentatious, built in the traditional Provençal style with honey-colored stone and red tile roofs. A valet takes my car, and I am escorted through gardens that speak of careful attention and considerable expense. Lavender borders frame gravel paths, and ancient olive trees provide shade for intimate seating areas. Everything suggests taste and refinement, rather than mere wealth. The villa's interior continues this theme. The entrance hall features a magnificent staircase with wrought iron railings, and the walls display paintings that even my untrained eye recognizes as exceptional. A Monet water lily study hangs beside what appears to be a small Picasso from his blue period. If these are authentic, Monsieur Beaumont possesses a collection worth millions. Inspector Dubois, a voice calls from across the hall. How good of you to come. I turn to see a man in his 60s approaching with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Auguste Beaumont is tall and distinguished, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead and intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. His evening clothes are perfectly tailored, and he carries himself with the bearing of old money and excellent breeding. Monsieur Beaumont, I reply, extending my hand. Thank you for the invitation. Your home is magnificent. You are too kind, but please come meet the other guests. We are a small group tonight, just 6, including yourself. I prefer intimate gatherings when discussing serious matters. He leads me into a salon where 5 people stand with drinks, engaged in the kind of polite conversation that precedes dinner at such gatherings. The room itself is a work of art. with silk-covered walls in pale gold and furniture that speaks of centuries rather than decades. But it is the paintings that command attention, a collection that would be the envy of any museum. "Allow me to introduce everyone," Beaumont says, guiding me toward a woman in her 50s who radiates the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of being taken seriously. Dr. Catherine Moreau, our most distinguished art historian. Catherine has written the definitive work on post-impressionist forgeries. Dr. Moreau extends a firm handshake. She is handsome rather than beautiful, with graying brown hair pulled back in a classic chignon, and intelligent eyes that seem to catalogue everything they see. Her black evening dress is elegant but understated, and she wears no jewelry except for a simple gold watch. "Inspector Dubois," she says, "Auguste tells me you have an interest in authenticity, a fascinating subject, particularly in our current market." "I am more interested in truth than authenticity," I reply, though I suspect they are often the same thing. Often, but not always, truth can be quite subjective in the art world. Beaumont moves us along to a younger man who stands slightly apart from the group, studying a small canvas with intense concentration. Monsieur Jean-Luc Moreau, no relation to Catherine despite the name. Jean-Luc is one of Europe's most respected art dealers. Jean-Luc Moreau is perhaps 40, with a kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggests considerable attention to personal grooming. His dark hair is styled with precision. His evening clothes are clearly expensive, and his manner suggests someone who is accustomed to being the most knowledgeable person in any room about his subject. "Inspector," he says, offering a brief handshake before returning his attention to the painting. "Fascinating piece, this. The brushwork is exceptional, but something about the provenance troubles me." "What troubles you?" I ask. "The documentation is perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. In my experience, paintings with flawless paperwork often have the most interesting stories." Beaumont chuckles. Jean-Luc sees mysteries everywhere. It is what makes him so valuable to his clients. Our host guides us to an elderly gentleman who sits in a leather chair near the fireplace, a crystal glass of what appears to be very old cognac in his hand. Professor Émile Rousseau, recently retired from the Sorbonne. Émile has forgotten more about Renaissance art than most of us will ever know. Professor Rousseau rises with the careful movements of someone whose body no longer matches his mental agility. He is thin and elegant, with white hair and a neatly trimmed beard that gives him the appearance of a scholarly saint. His eyes, however, are sharp and alert. "Inspector Dubois," he says in a voice that carries the authority of decades in the lecture hall. "I have heard of your work. You have an interesting approach to investigation, viewing crime scenes like postcards, I believe." "You are well informed, Professor." "Information is my profession, or was until recently. Now I content myself with enjoying beautiful things and trying to understand their stories. And what story does this room tell you?" Professor Rousseau glances around the salon with the practiced eye of someone who has spent a lifetime evaluating art. "Wealth, certainly. Taste, undoubtedly. But also something else, a certain urgency in the collecting, as if time were running short." Before I can ask what he means, Beaumont introduces me to a woman who has been standing near the windows, apparently absorbed in the view of the darkening Mediterranean. Madame Sylvie Dubois. Another Dubois, though again no relation. Sylvie owns one of Monaco's most prestigious galleries. Madame Dubois turns from the window with a smile that seems both warm and calculating. She is perhaps 50, with the kind of understated elegance that speaks of excellent taste and considerable resources. Her silver hair is styled in a modern cut that flatters her fine features, and her evening dress is clearly couture. "Inspector," she says, extending a hand adorned with a single perfect emerald ring. "How delightful to meet another Dubois. I wonder if we might be distant cousins." "It is possible," I reply, though I suspect the name is common enough that coincidence is more likely than kinship. "Perhaps, but I prefer to think we share more than a name. Auguste tells me you have an eye for detecting what others miss. That is a valuable skill in the art world." "And in yours, I imagine?" "Indeed. My clients depend on my ability to distinguish between what appears to be valuable and what actually is valuable. The distinction is not always obvious." Finally, Beaumont leads me to the last guest, a man who has been standing alone near a display case, containing what appear to be ancient artifacts. Monsieur Victor Petrov, visiting us from St. Petersburg. Victor represents several important Russian collectors. Petrov is a large man with the kind of presence that commands attention, even when he says nothing. His evening clothes are well tailored, but somehow fail to disguise the impression that he would be more comfortable in less formal attire. His handshake is firm to the point of being aggressive, and his English carries a slight accent that adds gravity to his words. "Inspector Dubois," he says, "I have heard interesting things about your methods. In Russia, we appreciate thoroughness in investigation. And I appreciate directness in conversation, Monsieur Petrov." "Good. Then we understand each other. I am here because Auguste has something I want, and I have something he needs. Simple business." "What does he need?" "Legitimacy. In the art world, provenance is everything. Without proper documentation, even the most beautiful painting is worthless." Beaumont clears his throat. "Perhaps we should move to dinner. I am eager to show you all the reason for tonight's gathering." We follow our host into a dining room that continues the villa's theme of understated elegance. The table is set for 6 with crystal and silver that catch the light from a magnificent chandelier. The walls display more paintings, including what appears to be a Van Gogh sketch and a small Cézanne still life. But it is the painting at the head of the room that draws everyone's attention. It depicts a young woman in Renaissance dress, her hands folded in her lap, her expression both serene and mysterious. The technique is masterful, the colors rich and luminous, despite what must be centuries of age. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beaumont announces as we take our seats, "I present Portrait of a Lady by Leonardo da Vinci, recently acquired after decades of negotiation." The silence that follows this announcement is profound. Dr. Moreau leans forward in her chair, studying the painting with intense concentration. Jean-Luc Moreau sets down his wineglass with a sharp click against the table. Professor Rousseau removes his spectacles and cleans them carefully before replacing them. Madame Dubois and Monsieur Petrov exchange a glance that suggests they know something the rest of us do not. Magnificent, Dr. Moreau finally says. If authentic, it would be worth, well, the value would be incalculable. If authentic, Beaumont's voice carries a note of challenge. I assure you, Catherine, the provenance is impeccable. The painting has been in private hands for over 2 centuries, carefully preserved and documented. May I examine the documentation? Jean-Luc asks. Of course. After dinner I will show you everything. X-rays, chemical analysis, historical records. You will find it all in order. Professor Rousseau speaks quietly. Auguste, my friend, you must understand our caution. A previously unknown Leonardo would be the art discovery of the century. Such claims require extraordinary evidence, which I am prepared to provide, Beaumont replies. But first, let us enjoy our meal. The painting has waited 500 years to be properly appreciated. It can wait another hour. The dinner that follows is excellent. Fresh fish from the Mediterranean, vegetables from local gardens, wines that speak of careful selection and proper aging. The conversation flows easily among people who clearly know each other well and share common interests. But I notice that everyone's attention returns repeatedly to the painting, as if drawn by some magnetic force. Dr. Moreau discusses the technical aspects of Renaissance painting techniques. Jean-Luc shares stories of recent discoveries and market trends. Professor Rousseau offers historical context about Leonardo's known works and working methods. Madame Dubois and Monsieur Petrov contribute observations about the international art market and the challenges of authentication. Throughout the meal, I find myself studying not just the painting, but the people around the table. Each guest clearly possesses expertise that would be valuable in evaluating such a discovery. But I also sense undercurrents of tension that suggest not everyone is entirely comfortable with tonight's revelation. As we finish the main course, Beaumont rises from his chair. Before we examine the documentation, I want to share something with you. This painting represents more than just an addition to my collection. It is the culmination of a lifetime of searching, of following clues and pursuing leads that others dismissed as impossible. He walks to the painting and stands beside it, his hand resting lightly on the ornate frame. 20 years ago, I first heard rumors of a lost Leonardo, a portrait that had disappeared during the chaos of the French Revolution. The trail led through private collections, auction houses, and eventually to a small chateau in Normandy, where an elderly woman possessed what she believed to be a copy. And you convinced her otherwise? Professor Rousseau asks. I convinced her to allow proper examination. The results were extraordinary. Layer by layer, we uncovered evidence that this was indeed the work of the master himself. What kind of evidence? Dr. Moreau inquires. Pigment analysis consistent with Leonardo's known palette. Underdrawings revealed by X-ray that match his documented techniques. Wood from the correct period and region. Most importantly, a signature hidden beneath centuries of overpainting. Jean-Luc leans forward. You found a signature? More than that. We found a complete inscription in Leonardo's own hand, describing the subject and the circumstances of the commission. The excitement around the table is palpable. If Beaumont's claims are true, he has made one of the most significant art discoveries in modern history. But I notice that not everyone appears entirely convinced. Madame Dubois speaks carefully. Auguste, such a discovery would have enormous implications for the art market. Have you considered the complications that might arise? What kind of complications? I ask. Questions of ownership, for one thing. Petrov says bluntly, if this painting was stolen during the Revolution, there may be legitimate claims from the original family. Or from the French government, Professor Rousseau adds. National treasures have a way of becoming political issues. Beaumont waves dismissively. All such concerns have been addressed. The legal ownership is clear and uncontested. The painting is mine by right of purchase and proper documentation. And the woman in Normandy, Dr. Moreau asks. What was her compensation for this discovery? For the first time this evening, Beaumont hesitates. She was, adequately compensated for what she believed she was selling. Which was a copy, Jean-Luc observes. Which was what she believed it to be. Yes. I make a mental note of this exchange. In my experience, when people become defensive about financial arrangements, there are often good reasons for their discomfort. Perhaps, I suggest, we should examine this documentation you mentioned. I confess, I am curious to see how one proves the authenticity of a 500-year-old painting. Of course, Beaumont agrees. Let us adjourn to my study. I have everything prepared for your examination. We follow him through the villa to a room that clearly serves as both office and private gallery. The walls are lined with paintings, and several glass cases contain what appear to be manuscripts and artifacts. A large desk dominates the center of the room, and upon it are spread documents, photographs, and scientific reports. Here, Beaumont says, gesturing to the materials, is everything you need to verify the painting's authenticity. Dr. Moreau immediately begins examining the scientific reports while Jean-Luc studies the provenance documentation. Professor Rousseau focuses on the historical context, and Petrov reviews what appear to be legal documents. Madame Dubois stands slightly apart, watching the others work. I position myself where I can observe everyone while appearing to study the materials myself. The documents are impressive. Detailed chemical analyses, X-ray photographs showing underlying layers, historical records tracing the painting's ownership through several centuries. If these are forgeries, they are extraordinarily sophisticated ones. The pigment analysis is convincing, Dr. Moreau admits. The materials are consistent with Leonardo's known palette and techniques. The provenance documentation appears complete, Jean-Luc adds, though his tone suggests some reservation, though I would want to verify some of these sources independently. The historical context is plausible. Professor Rousseau says, Leonardo did work on several portraits during the period in question, and at least 2 are known to be lost. The legal documentation seems in order, Petrov concludes, though as I mentioned, there could be complications if other parties come forward with claims. Beaumont beams with satisfaction. Then you agree that the painting is authentic? The evidence is certainly compelling. Dr. Moreau says carefully, though final authentication would require additional testing and peer review. Which I am prepared to arrange, Beaumont replies. In fact, I have already contacted several major museums about a possible exhibition. The Louvre has expressed considerable interest. As the group continues to discuss the technical aspects of authentication, I find myself drawn to a small detail that others seem to have overlooked. Among the photographs on the desk is one showing the painting during restoration, with several layers of overpainting removed. In this image, the subject's expression appears subtly different, less serene, perhaps more troubled. Monsieur Beaumont, I say, picking up the photograph, this image shows the painting during restoration? Yes, that was taken after we removed several centuries of accumulated varnish and overpainting. Quite remarkable how much the original colors were enhanced. The subject's expression seems different in this photograph. Beaumont glances at the image. Lighting can create such illusions. The painting's expression is exactly as Leonardo intended. But as I study the photograph more closely, I notice something else. In the background of the restoration image, partially visible, is what appears to be another painting, one that looks remarkably similar to the Leonardo, but with subtle differences in composition and technique. What is this other painting in the background? I ask. Beaumont takes the photograph and examines it. For just a moment his confident demeanor wavers. Ah, that. It is simply another work from my collection. Nothing of particular significance. It appears quite similar to the Leonardo. Superficial resemblance only. The art world is full of copies and studies of famous works. But his explanation does not entirely satisfy me. In my experience, when people dismiss questions too quickly, they often have reasons for wanting to avoid deeper inquiry. The evening continues with more technical discussion and examination of the documentation. By the time we prepare to leave, most of the guests seem convinced that Beaumont has indeed made a remarkable discovery. Only I remain troubled by small inconsistencies and the host's occasional evasiveness. As I prepare to depart, Beaumont takes me aside. Inspector, I hope you found this evening enlightening. Your reputation for detecting authenticity made your opinion particularly valuable to me. I found it very interesting indeed, Monsieur Beaumont, though I confess, I have more questions than answers. Questions are natural when confronted with something extraordinary. But I assure you, everything about this painting is exactly as I have represented. I am sure you believe that to be true. He studies my face carefully. You sound skeptical. I am naturally cautious about claims that seem too good to be true. In my experience, when something appears perfect, it often bears closer examination. And if I were to invite such examination, would you be interested in learning more about the painting's history? I would be very interested indeed. Excellent. Then perhaps you would join me for lunch tomorrow. I can show you additional documentation and answer any questions you might have. I would be delighted. As I drive down the winding road toward Nice, I reflect on the evening's events. Auguste Beaumont has certainly assembled impressive evidence for his painting's authenticity. The scientific analysis appears thorough. The historical documentation seems complete, and the expert opinions are largely favorable. Yet something troubles me about the entire presentation. Perhaps it is the photograph showing the similar painting in the background. Perhaps it is Beaumont's defensive reaction to questions about the original owner's compensation. Or perhaps it is simply my natural suspicion of situations that appear too perfect. In my experience, the most dangerous deceptions are those that contain the most truth. A skilled forger does not create obvious fakes. They create works that can withstand all but the most careful scrutiny. And a skilled deceiver does not tell obvious lies. They tell stories that are almost entirely true, with only the most crucial details altered. As I reach my villa and prepare for bed, I make a mental note to research Auguste Beaumont and his collection more thoroughly. If he has indeed discovered a lost Leonardo, it would be one of the most significant art finds in modern history. But if he has not, if this is an elaborate deception, then the implications could be far more serious than a simple case of fraud. The art world, I am beginning to understand, is a place where enormous sums of money change hands based on questions of authenticity that can never be answered with complete certainty. In such an environment, the temptation to blur the line between truth and fiction must be enormous. Tomorrow's lunch should prove illuminating. Tonight I will content myself with adding Auguste Beaumont's invitation to my collection and wondering what story this particular postcard will eventually tell. Chapter 2. Shadows and Revelations. I wake to the sound of rain against my bedroom windows, unusual for this time of year on the Riviera. The Mediterranean morning that had seemed so perfect yesterday has given way to gray skies and the kind of steady precipitation that makes everything look different, more serious somehow. Over breakfast, I telephone my contact at the Nice police station, Sergeant Moreau. No relation to either of the Moreaus I met last evening, though the coincidence of names continues to amuse me. "Henri," he says when he recognizes my voice, "what brings you to call so early?" "I need information about a man named Auguste Beaumont. He owns a villa in the hills above Nice and claims to be an art collector." "Beaumont. Yes, I know the name. Wealthy, respectable, keeps to himself, mostly. Why the interest?" "He invited me to dinner last night to view what he claims is a newly discovered Leonardo da Vinci." Sergeant Moreau whistles softly. "A Leonardo. That would be worth—" "Millions, yes. Perhaps tens of millions. Which is why I want to know more about Monsieur Beaumont's background." "I can make some inquiries. Give me a few hours." "I would appreciate that. I am having lunch with him today, and I would prefer to know what questions to ask." After ending the call, I spend the morning researching what I can about Leonardo's known works and the art authentication process. The more I learn, the more I appreciate the complexity of proving a painting's authenticity. Scientific analysis can determine the age of materials and the composition of pigments, but it cannot definitively prove that a particular hand created a particular work. Authentication ultimately depends on the judgment of experts who have spent decades studying an artist's techniques, style, and working methods. But experts can disagree, and their opinions can be influenced by factors beyond pure scholarship: reputation, financial interests, professional relationships. At noon I drive back up the winding road to Villa Marguerite. The rain has stopped, but the sky remains overcast, giving the landscape a more subdued character than it had possessed in yesterday's golden light. The villa itself appears different as well. Less welcoming, perhaps, or simply more serious. Beaumont greets me at the door with the same courtesy as before, but I notice subtle changes in his demeanor. He seems more guarded, more careful in his words and gestures. Perhaps yesterday's enthusiasm has given way to second thoughts about sharing his discovery so widely. "Inspector," he says, leading me to a small dining room that overlooks the garden. "I trust you slept well, despite the weather." "Very well, thank you. Though I confess, I spent much of the morning thinking about your remarkable painting." "And what conclusions did you reach?" "That authentication is a more complex process than I had realized. The scientific evidence you showed us was impressive, but I understand that such analysis can only tell part of the story." Beaumont nods as he pours wine from a bottle that bears no label. "True. Ultimately, authentication depends on the consensus of recognized experts, which is why I was so pleased to have Dr. Moreau and the others examine the documentation. And their opinions were favorable. Cautiously favorable, yes, though as you heard, they would prefer additional testing and peer review before making definitive statements. We are served a simple but excellent lunch: fresh bread, local cheese, vegetables from the villa's garden. The wine is exceptional, clearly from a private collection rather than commercial production. Throughout the meal, Beaumont speaks knowledgeably about art history and the challenges facing collectors in the modern market. "The art world has become increasingly complex," he explains. "Prices have risen to extraordinary levels, which has attracted both legitimate collectors and those with less honorable intentions. Forgery has become a sophisticated industry, and even experts can be deceived by skillful work, which makes authentication all the more important." "Exactly, but it also makes collectors like myself vulnerable to suspicion. When someone claims to have discovered a lost masterpiece, the natural reaction is skepticism. A healthy reaction, surely. Healthy, yes, but sometimes carried to extremes. I have encountered people who seem to believe that any new discovery must be fraudulent simply because it is new." After lunch, Beaumont leads me back to his study, where additional documents have been laid out on the desk. These appear to be correspondence with various experts and institutions, all relating to the Leonardo painting. "I wanted you to see these," he says, gesturing to the papers. "Letters from museum curators, university professors, authentication services, all expressing interest in the painting and preliminary support for its attribution." I examine the correspondence carefully. The letters are impressive. Responses from the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum, the National Gallery in London, all express cautious but genuine interest in examining the painting further. These institutions are willing to consider exhibiting the work, I ask. "Pending final authentication, yes. The Louvre has even suggested a special exhibition focusing on newly discovered Renaissance works." "That would be quite an honor." "Indeed, and quite valuable as well. A Louvre exhibition would establish the painting's authenticity beyond question. As I continue reading the correspondence, I notice something interesting. Several of the letters mention other works in Beaumont's collection, suggesting that this is not his first significant acquisition. "You have made other important discoveries?" I ask. "A few over the years. Nothing quite as significant as the Leonardo, but several pieces that have enhanced our understanding of various artists and periods." "May I ask how you locate such works?" Beaumont hesitates slightly before answering. "Research, mostly. I spend considerable time studying auction records, estate sales, private collections. Sometimes I follow leads that others have dismissed as unpromising." "Like the chateau in Normandy where you found the Leonardo?" "Exactly. The elderly woman had inherited the painting from her grandmother, who had acquired it during the 1920s. The family had always assumed it was a copy, so they never bothered to have it properly examined." "And you convinced them to allow such examination?" "I offered to pay for the analysis myself. When the results suggested the painting might be authentic, I made an offer to purchase it." "At what price?" Again, Beaumont hesitates. "A fair price, given what the family believed they were selling, but not what they would have asked if they had known the truth." "Inspector, you seem to be suggesting some impropriety in my acquisition of the painting." "I am simply trying to understand the circumstances. In my experience, when large sums of money are involved, it is wise to ensure that all parties are treated fairly." "The family was treated entirely fairly. They received considerably more than they expected for what they believed to be a copy." "But considerably less than they would have received if they had known it was authentic." "That is speculation. We cannot know what they would have done with different information." I make a note of his defensive tone. In my experience, people who have acted entirely properly rarely become defensive when asked about their actions. "May I ask about the other painting I saw in the restoration photograph? The one that appeared similar to the Leonardo?" Beaumont's expression tightens slightly. "As I mentioned yesterday, it is simply another work from my collection. A study or copy, nothing more." "May I see it?" "I'm afraid that would not be possible. The painting is currently on loan to a private collector in Switzerland." "When will it return?" "The loan is indefinite. The collector is considering a purchase." I find this explanation unsatisfying, but I do not press the point immediately. Instead, I ask to see more of Beaumont's collection, hoping to gain a better understanding of his taste and methods. He leads me through several rooms of the villa, each containing paintings and artifacts that would be the envy of most museums. The quality is consistently high, and the range is impressive. Renaissance masters, Impressionist works, contemporary pieces by recognized artists. "You have excellent taste," I observe. "Thank you. I have spent many years developing my eye and my knowledge. And considerable resources as well, I imagine. I have been fortunate in my investments. The art market has been very good to me." As we tour the collection, I notice something interesting. Many of the paintings bear small plaques with detailed information about their provenance and authentication. But the Leonardo, which should be the crown jewel of the collection, has no such plaque. The Leonardo will receive proper documentation once the authentication process is complete. Beaumont explains when I mention this observation. Of course, but surely some preliminary information could be displayed. I prefer to wait until everything is finalized. Premature claims can be embarrassing if later proven incorrect. We return to the study where Beaumont offers me coffee and cognac. As we settle into comfortable chairs, I decide to ask more direct questions. Monsieur Beaumont, may I speak frankly? Of course. I have spent my career investigating situations where things are not as they initially appear. Your Leonardo discovery is certainly impressive, but there are aspects of the story that trouble me. What aspects? The convenient discovery of a lost masterpiece in the possession of someone who did not know its value. The perfect documentation that supports its authenticity. The similar painting that you dismiss as unimportant, but cannot show me. Beaumont sets down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Inspector, I invited you here because I value your reputation for detecting truth, but I am beginning to wonder if your suspicion has overcome your judgment. My suspicion is based on experience. In my work, I have learned that the most convincing deceptions are those that contain the most truth. And you believe I am deceiving you? I believe you are not telling me everything. Whether that constitutes deception depends on what you are withholding and why. Beaumont is quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he speaks. Inspector, the art world is not like your world of police work. Truth and falsehood are not always clearly defined. A painting can be authentic in some senses, and not in others. What do you mean? The Leonardo is painted with period materials using period techniques. The style is consistent with the master's known work. The subject and composition are appropriate for the time and place. In every measurable sense, it is authentic. But it was not painted by Leonardo da Vinci. The admission hangs in the air between us like a physical presence. I set down my own cup and lean forward. Then who painted it? A contemporary of Leonardo's, working in his style. Possibly someone from his workshop, possibly an independent artist influenced by his techniques. And you have known this all along. I have suspected it. The scientific evidence supports authenticity, but there are subtle stylistic elements that suggest a different hand. Yet you presented it to your guests as a genuine Leonardo. I presented the evidence and allowed them to draw their own conclusions. That is a fine distinction, Monsieur Beaumont. It is an important distinction. I never explicitly claimed the painting was by Leonardo himself. I said it was attributed to him based on the available evidence. I consider this carefully. Beaumont is technically correct. He did not make explicit claims about the painting's authorship. But the implication was clear, and his guests certainly understood him to be claiming a Leonardo discovery. Why are you telling me this now? Because I believe you would discover the truth eventually, and I prefer to control how that discovery is made. And because you want something from me. Yes, I want your help in determining the painting's true authorship and value. Why would you need my help for that? Because I believe the painting may be connected to a crime. This revelation surprises me more than his admission about the painting's questionable attribution. What kind of crime? Theft. I have reason to believe the painting was stolen from its original owners sometime during the past 50 years. And you purchased it knowing this? I purchased it suspecting this. The family in Normandy had owned it for only 60 years, and their story about its acquisition was vague and inconsistent. So you may be in possession of stolen property. Possibly, which is why I need someone with your expertise to help me determine the truth. I lean back in my chair, trying to process this new information. Beaumont has admitted that his Leonardo is not by Leonardo, and that it may be stolen property. Yet he continues to seek authentication and museum exhibitions. The contradictions are puzzling. Monsieur Beaumont, I must ask, what exactly do you want from me? I want you to investigate the painting's true history, find out who really painted it, when it was stolen, and from whom. Help me determine whether I can legitimately keep it, or whether it should be returned to its rightful owners. And in return I will provide you with information about other questionable works in private collections throughout the Riviera. The art world has many secrets, Inspector, and some of them involve more serious crimes than simple theft. What kind of crimes? Murder, for one thing. There are people who will kill to possess certain works of art, and others who will kill to prevent their secrets from being exposed. The conversation has taken a turn I did not expect. What began as a simple question about authentication has become something much more complex and potentially dangerous. Are you suggesting that your painting is connected to a murder? I am suggesting that the art world is more dangerous than most people realize. Enormous sums of money are involved. Reputations can be destroyed by revelations of fraud or theft, and some collectors will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their interests, including murder. Including murder. I study Beaumont's face carefully. He appears sincere, but I have learned not to trust appearances entirely. Why should I believe you? Because tomorrow morning, you will read in the newspapers that Dr. Catherine Moreau was found dead in her apartment last night. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Dr. Moreau is dead, Inspector. Murdered, I believe, because of what she discovered about my painting. How do you know this? Because I found her body. I stand up abruptly, my mind racing. You found her body? When? Why haven't you reported it to the police? I found her this morning, before our lunch, and I have not reported it because I believe her death is connected to last night's dinner party, which means the killer is someone who was here in this room. That is all the more reason to contact the police immediately. The police will investigate her death as an isolated crime. They will not understand the connections to the art world, the implications for authentication fraud, the international networks involved in stolen art. And you believe I will? I believe you are the only person who can investigate this properly. You understand both criminal investigation and the complexities of authentication. You can see patterns that others would miss. I walk to the window and look out at the garden, trying to organize my thoughts. If Beaumont is telling the truth, then Dr. Moreau is dead, possibly murdered because of her involvement in authenticating his painting. If he is lying, then I am dealing with someone far more dangerous than a simple art fraud. Inspector, Beaumont says quietly, I know this is a great deal to ask, but I believe Dr. Moreau died because she discovered something about the painting that someone wanted to keep private. If we do not find the truth, others may die as well. I turn back to face him. If Dr. Moreau is indeed dead, then this is a matter for the police, not for a private investigator. The police will arrest me as the most obvious suspect. They will not look beyond the surface of the crime to understand its true significance. And you believe you are innocent. I know I am innocent of murder, whatever other crimes I may have committed. What other crimes? Fraud, possibly. Receiving stolen property, certainly. But not murder, Inspector. I may be a criminal, but I am not a killer. I consider my options. If I contact the police immediately, they will indeed focus on Beaumont as the primary suspect. If he is innocent, the real killer may escape while the investigation follows false leads. If he is guilty, then I am allowing a murderer to manipulate me. But there is another consideration. If Dr. Moreau was indeed killed because of her involvement in authenticating the painting, then the other guests from last night may also be in danger. Jean-Luc Moreau, Professor Rousseau, Madame Dubois, Monsieur Petrov. All of them examined the documentation and expressed opinions about the painting's authenticity. Where is Dr. Moreau's body? I ask. In her apartment in Nice. I have the address. How did you gain access to her apartment? She gave me a key yesterday evening. She wanted to examine some reference materials at home before making her final assessment of the painting. And you went there this morning because she was supposed to call me with her conclusions, and when she did not, I became concerned. What did you find? Her body in the study, surrounded by books and papers related to Renaissance art. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause of death. But definitely not natural causes. How can you be certain? Because of what was missing. What was missing? The photographs I gave her of the painting, the detailed images showing the brushwork and technique. Someone took them. Perhaps she returned them to you and you forgot. No. I specifically asked her to keep them for further study. Someone killed her and took those photographs because they revealed something important about the painting. I make my decision. I will examine the scene before we contact the police, but I want your word that you will cooperate fully with the official investigation when the time comes. You have it, and I want complete honesty from you about the painting, your collection, and any other relevant information. Agreed. Then let us go to Dr. Moreau's apartment. But first, I want you to call the other guests from last night and warn them to be careful. If someone is killing people connected to your painting, they may all be in danger. Beaumont nods and reaches for the telephone. As he begins dialing, I walk back to the window and look out at the gray afternoon sky. What had begun as a simple question about art authentication has become something much more serious. If Dr. Moreau is indeed dead, then I am dealing with a case that involves not just fraud and theft, but murder. And if the killer is one of the guests from last night's dinner party, then I have already met them, shaken their hand, and listened to their expert opinions about Renaissance art. The thought that one of those cultured, knowledgeable people might be a murderer is deeply disturbing. But in my experience, the most dangerous criminals are often those who appear most respectable. Education, culture, and social position can provide excellent camouflage for criminal intent. And in the art world, where enormous sums of money depend on questions of authenticity and provenance, the temptation to commit serious crimes must be enormous. As Beaumont finishes his telephone calls, I prepare myself for what we will find at Dr. Moreau's apartment. If she has indeed been murdered, then this case has become far more serious than a simple question of art fraud. And if the killer is someone from last night's dinner party, then I will need to use all my skills to identify them before they strike again. The rain has begun again, and the afternoon light is fading rapidly. As we prepare to leave Villa Marguerite, I cannot shake the feeling that we are walking into something much more dangerous than either of us fully understands. Chapter 3. The Scene of Truth. Dr. Catherine Moreau's apartment occupies the top floor of a 19th century building in the old quarter of Nice, where narrow streets wind between buildings that have witnessed generations of Mediterranean life. The rain has intensified during our drive from Villa Marguerite, and the cobblestones gleam wetly under the streetlights as Beaumont and I approach the entrance. "She lived alone?" I ask, as Beaumont produces a key from his pocket. "For the past 15 years, since her divorce. Her work was her life. She often said that art was more reliable than people." The irony of this statement, given the circumstances, is not lost on either of us. The building's interior reflects the careful maintenance typical of properties in this historic district. The staircase is marble, worn smooth by decades of use, and the wrought iron banister shows the craftsmanship of an earlier era. We climb 3 flights in silence, our footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. Dr. Moreau's apartment door bears a small brass nameplate, and nothing more. Beaumont hesitates before inserting the key. "Inspector, I should warn you, the scene is quite disturbing, though not in the way you might expect." "What do you mean?" "You will understand when you see it." He unlocks the door and we step into a small foyer that opens onto a living room furnished with the kind of understated elegance that speaks of good taste and modest means. Books line every available wall space, and several comfortable chairs are positioned to take advantage of the natural light from tall windows. But it is not the living room that draws our attention. Through an open doorway I can see into what appears to be a study, and even from this distance, it is clear that something is very wrong. We approach the study carefully. The room is in complete chaos. Books pulled from shelves, papers scattered across the floor, furniture overturned. In the center of this destruction, Dr. Catherine Moreau sits in a leather chair, her head tilted back, her eyes closed, appearing almost peaceful despite the devastation around her. "Mon Dieu," I whisper, moving closer to examine the scene. Dr. Moreau is dressed in the same black evening dress she wore to dinner last night, though it is now wrinkled and disheveled. Her hands rest in her lap, and there are no obvious signs of violence on her body. but her face has the waxy pallor that speaks of death, and when I check for a pulse, her skin is cold to the touch. "How long has she been dead?" I ask. "Several hours, I would estimate. I found her at approximately 10 this morning." I examine the body more carefully, looking for any indication of the cause of death. There are no wounds, no signs of struggle, no obvious trauma. But there is something else, a faint, sweet odor that I cannot immediately identify. "Do you smell that?" I ask Beaumont. He sniffs carefully. "Yes. Almonds, perhaps." "Cyanide?" I say grimly, though I cannot be certain without proper analysis. I turn my attention to the chaos surrounding Dr. Moreau's body. The destruction appears systematic rather than random. Someone was searching for something specific. Books have been pulled from shelves and their pages rifled through. File cabinets have been emptied, their contents scattered across the floor. Even the cushions of the furniture have been removed and examined. "You said photographs were missing." "Yes. I gave her several detailed images of the painting's surface, showing the brushwork and technique. They are not here." I search through the scattered papers, looking for any trace of the missing photographs. There are many images related to Dr. Moreau's work, reproductions of famous paintings, technical photographs showing various analytical techniques, documentation from authentication projects, but nothing that appears to relate to Beaumont's Leonardo. What else might someone have been looking for? Her notes, perhaps. Catherine was meticulous about documenting her observations and conclusions. And those are missing as well. I cannot find them. She always kept detailed written records of her authentication work. I continue examining the scene, trying to understand the sequence of events. The destruction is thorough, but not violent. Whoever did this took time to search carefully, rather than simply destroying everything in sight. The door was locked when you arrived. Yes, I used the key she gave me. And there are no other entrances to the apartment. A service entrance through the kitchen, but it was also locked from the inside. I checked the kitchen entrance and confirmed that it is indeed secured. The windows in the study are closed and latched from the inside. If this is murder, the killer either had a key or was admitted by Dr. Moreau herself. Who else might have had access to the apartment? I do not know. Catherine was quite private about her personal life. I returned to the study and examined Dr. Moreau's body more carefully. Her evening dress suggests she had not changed clothes after returning from dinner, which means she died sometime between leaving Villa Marguerite and this morning. But the systematic nature of the search suggests the killer had considerable time to work. What time did she leave your villa last night? Approximately 11 o'clock. She was the first to depart. And she seemed normal when she left? Perhaps slightly preoccupied, but not alarmed or frightened. I noticed something else about Dr. Moreau's position in the chair. Her hands are folded neatly in her lap, and her feet are positioned parallel to each other. This suggests either that she died peacefully or that someone arranged her body after death. Beaumont, I need you to think carefully. Did Dr. Moreau say anything last night that might indicate she had discovered something significant about your painting? She asked several technical questions about the restoration process. She seemed particularly interested in the layers of overpainting that had been removed. What kind of questions? She wanted to know exactly which areas had been cleaned and whether any original paint had been disturbed. She also asked about the signature that was supposedly revealed during restoration. And what did you tell her? The truth, that the signature was discovered beneath several layers of later additions, and that it appeared to be in Leonardo's hand. But you now believe the painting is not by Leonardo. I believe it is by someone from his circle, possibly someone who had access to his techniques and materials. I walk around the study, trying to piece together what happened here. The killer was looking for something specific. The photographs, certainly, but possibly other evidence as well. Dr. Moreau's expertise in detecting forgeries made her dangerous to someone who had something to hide. Did she express any doubts about the painting's authenticity? Not directly, but she did ask some pointed questions about the provenance documentation. What kind of questions? She wanted to know more about the family in Normandy who had owned the painting. She seemed skeptical about their story of how they had acquired it. And you could not provide satisfactory answers. I told her what I knew, which was limited. The family claimed it had been in their possession since the 1920s, but they had no documentation to support this claim. I examined the scattered papers more carefully, looking for any clues about what Dr. Moreau might have discovered. Among the chaos, I find several books about art forgery and authentication, all marked with numerous bookmarks and annotations. One volume, The Forger's Art, A History of Deception, lies open to a chapter about Renaissance techniques. She was researching forgery methods. Catherine was always researching something. Her expertise in detecting fakes was based on understanding how they are created. I pick up the book and examine the open pages. The chapter discusses how skilled forgers can create works that are virtually indistinguishable from authentic pieces, using period materials and techniques learned through careful study of original works. According to this, I say, reading from the text, the most successful forgeries are those created by artists who are genuinely talented in their own right. They do not simply copy existing works, they create new pieces in the style of the master. Which is exactly what I suspect happened with my painting. But if the painting is a skilled forgery, why would someone kill to keep that secret? Forgeries are discovered regularly without anyone resorting to murder. Unless there is more at stake than just one painting. What do you mean? What if my painting is part of a larger operation? What if someone has been creating and selling multiple forgeries, using the same techniques and documentation methods? The implications of this possibility are staggering. If Beaumont is correct, we may be dealing with an international art fraud operation worth millions of dollars. And if Dr. Moreau had discovered evidence of such an operation, her death would make perfect sense from the killer's perspective. Do you have any evidence to support this theory? Only suspicions. But some of the other guests last night have been involved in authentication cases that later proved controversial. Which guests? Jean-Luc Moreau has been associated with several high-profile sales that were later questioned. Professor Rousseau has authenticated works that other experts have disputed. Even Madame Dubois has sold pieces through her gallery that have raised eyebrows in the art community. And Monsieur Petrov. Petrov represents collectors who are not always careful about provenance. The Russian art market has been particularly problematic in recent years. I consider this information carefully. If any of the dinner guests are involved in art fraud, they would have strong motives for preventing Dr. Moreau from exposing their activities. But which one would be desperate enough to commit murder? We need to contact the police, I say finally. This scene must be properly processed, and the other guests must be questioned. I agree. But I want your word that you will continue investigating the art fraud aspects of the case. The police will focus on the murder, but they may miss the larger implications. You have my word. But first, we must ensure that the other guests are safe. If someone is killing to protect their secrets, they may not stop with Dr. Moreau. Beaumont nods and reaches for the telephone on Dr. Moreau's desk. As he dials the police, I take one final look around the study, trying to memorize every detail before the official investigation begins. Something catches my eye, a small piece of paper partially hidden beneath an overturned chair. I retrieve it carefully and examine it in the light. It appears to be a fragment of a photograph, showing what looks like a signature or inscription in the corner of a painting. Beaumont, I call softly. Look at this. He covers the telephone receiver and examines the fragment. It is part of one of the photographs I gave her. The signature area? Yes. This shows the inscription that was revealed during restoration. I study the fragment more carefully. The signature appears to read, Leonardo da Vinci. But something about the lettering troubles me. The style seems slightly different from examples of Leonardo's authentic signatures that I have seen in books. This signature. Are you certain it is authentic? The restoration experts assured me it was consistent with Leonardo's known hand. But you have doubts? I have doubts about everything connected to this painting. The police arrive within minutes of Beaumont's call, led by Inspector Marcel Dubois. Yet another Dubois, though this one is actually a distant cousin of mine. Marcel is a competent investigator, though he tends to focus on obvious explanations rather than subtle complexities. Henri, he says, greeting me with surprise, what brings you to a crime scene? Monsieur Beaumont asked for my assistance with a matter related to art authentication. We discovered Dr. Moreau's body this morning. Art authentication? And now murder? Marcel shakes his head. Only you would find a way to complicate a simple death investigation. I do not believe this is a simple death. Marcel. Dr. Moreau was an expert in detecting art forgeries, and she may have discovered something that someone wanted to keep secret. You think she was killed because of her work? I think it is a strong possibility. Marcel examines the scene with the methodical approach that has made him successful in his career. He notes the systematic destruction, the apparent lack of struggle, and the suspicious circumstances of Dr. Moreau's death. Poison? He asks after examining the body. Possibly cyanide based on the odor, but you will need proper analysis to confirm. And the apartment was locked when you arrived. Yes, Beaumont confirms. I used the key Dr. Moreau had given me. Marcel questions Beaumont about the previous evening's dinner party, the guests who attended, and Dr. Moreau's role in examining the Leonardo painting. He takes careful notes but seems skeptical about the connection between art authentication and murder. People do not usually kill over paintings, he observes. They do when millions of dollars are at stake, I reply. The art market involves enormous sums of money, and fraud is more common than most people realize. But murder! If Dr. Moreau had discovered evidence of a large-scale forgery operation, the financial implications could be devastating for those involved. Marcel considers this possibility but remains focused on more conventional motives. We will need to question all the guests from last night's dinner, and we will need a complete background check on Dr. Moreau herself. I can provide you with contact information for the other guests, Beaumont offers. Good. And I want both of you to remain available for further questioning. As the police begin their formal investigation of the scene, I take Beaumont aside for a private conversation. I want you to think carefully about each of the guests from last night. Is there anything, any comment, any reaction, any behavior that seemed unusual or suspicious? Jean-Luc seemed particularly interested in the provenance documentation. He spent more time examining those papers than anyone else. What about Professor Rousseau? He was very quiet during the technical discussions. Usually, Émile is quite vocal about authentication matters. Madame Dubois? She asked several questions about the painting's market value, more than seemed appropriate for casual conversation. And Petrov? Victor was more interested in the legal aspects of ownership than in the artistic merits. He kept asking about potential claims from other parties. Any of these reactions could be significant. We need to investigate each guest's background and recent activities. How do we do that without alerting them to our suspicions? Carefully, and with the help of people who understand the art world better than I do. As we prepare to leave Dr. Moreau's apartment, I notice something else that troubles me. Among the scattered papers, there are several auction catalogues and gallery brochures, all featuring works that appear to be from the Renaissance period. Many of the pieces are marked with small annotations in Dr. Moreau's handwriting. She was researching other Renaissance works. Catherine was always working on multiple authentication projects. She was one of the most sought-after experts in Europe. These annotations, do they indicate anything specific? Beaumont examines the marked catalogues. She seems to have been questioning the authenticity of several pieces that have sold recently for very high prices. All Renaissance works. Mostly, yes, and all from private collections rather than established museums. The pattern is becoming clearer. If Dr. Moreau had been investigating a network of Renaissance forgeries, she would have posed a significant threat to anyone involved in such an operation. Her death may have been intended to silence her before she could expose the full scope of the fraud. Beaumont, I need you to compile a list of all the works Dr. Moreau had been examining recently. Include any pieces she had questioned or authenticated in the past year. That could be a considerable list. Then we had better get started. If we are dealing with a forgery network, Dr. Moreau's murder may be just the beginning. Chapter 4. Patterns in Paint. The next morning brings clear skies and the kind of brilliant Mediterranean light that makes everything appear more hopeful than it actually is. I have spent the night reviewing everything I know about art authentication and forgery, trying to understand the complexities of a world where enormous sums of money depend on expert opinions about brushstrokes and pigment composition. Beaumont arrives at my villa at 9 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio that contains the information I requested about Dr. Moreau's recent work. I contacted several colleagues who worked with Catherine. He explains as we settle in my study. The list of pieces she examined in the past year is quite extensive. He opens the portfolio and spreads out photographs and documentation relating to dozens of paintings, sculptures, and artifacts. The scope of Dr. Moreau's work is impressive. She had been involved in authentication projects for major auction houses, private collectors, and museums throughout Europe. Look at this pattern, Beaumont says, pointing to a series of photographs. In the past 6 months, Catherine questioned the authenticity of at least 12 Renaissance works that had been offered for sale or exhibition. I examined the images carefully. The works are all of exceptional quality, the kind of pieces that would command millions of dollars if authentic. But according to Beaumont's notes, Dr. Moreau had expressed doubts about each one. What were her specific concerns? Technical issues, mostly. Inconsistencies in brushwork, anachronistic materials, problems with provenance documentation, the kinds of subtle details that only an expert would notice. And what happened to these pieces after she questioned them? That is the interesting part. Several were withdrawn from sale without explanation. Others were sold privately to collectors who did not require public authentication, suggesting that someone was avoiding further scrutiny. Exactly. If you have a painting that one expert has questioned, the last thing you want is additional examination by other experts. I study the documentation more carefully, looking for connections between the questioned works. Several patterns emerge that trouble me. Many of these pieces share similar provenance stories, I observe. Private collections, family inheritances, discoveries in estate sales. Yes, and notice the geographic concentration. Most of the supposed discoveries occurred in France, particularly in rural areas where documentation might be less reliable. The same pattern as your Leonardo. The same pattern, exactly. I make notes about the various pieces, their supposed histories, and the reasons for Dr. Moreau's skepticism. A picture begins to emerge of a sophisticated operation that creates high-quality forgeries with carefully constructed provenance stories. Who would have the skills to create such works? The technical expertise required is considerable. You would need artists capable of working in historical styles, access to period materials, knowledge of aging techniques, and the ability to create convincing documentation. And the resources to maintain such an operation. Substantial. The initial investment in materials, equipment, and expertise would be enormous, but the potential profits would justify the expense. How much could such an operation generate? If they were successfully selling even a few pieces per year, we could be talking about tens of millions of dollars in revenue. The financial implications are staggering. With such enormous sums at stake, murder becomes a rational business decision for protecting the operation. We need to identify the common elements among these questioned pieces, I say. Who sold them? Who authenticated them? Who purchased them? I have been thinking about that. Several of the pieces were sold through auction houses that used the same authentication services. Which services? A company called European Art Authentication, based in Geneva. They specialize in Renaissance and Baroque works. And who owns this company? That is where it becomes interesting. The company is owned by a consortium of investors, but the actual operations are managed by a small group of experts. Including anyone we know? Including Jean-Luc Moreau. This revelation stops me cold. Jean-Luc Moreau, one of the guests at Beaumont's dinner party, is directly connected to the authentication of multiple works that Dr. Moreau had questioned. How long has he been involved with this company? According to my research, he became a partner about 3 years ago. Since then, European Art Authentication has handled some of the most significant Renaissance discoveries in recent years, all of which Dr. Moreau questioned. Not all, but a significant percentage. I consider the implications carefully. If Jean-Luc Moreau is involved in a forgery operation, he would have had strong motives for silencing Dr. Moreau. But would he have been bold enough to attend a dinner party where she was examining another questionable work? Perhaps that is exactly why he attended. I muse aloud. To assess how much she knew and how dangerous she had become. You think he killed her? I think he is a strong suspect, but we need more evidence before drawing conclusions. I examined the photographs of the questioned works more carefully, looking for technical similarities that might indicate common authorship. While I am not an art expert, I can see certain consistencies in style and technique that suggest the same hand may have created multiple pieces. These brushstrokes, I say, pointing to details in several paintings, do they appear similar to you? Beaumont studies the images with the practiced eye of a collector. There are similarities, yes. The way the paint is applied, the treatment of light and shadow, certain stylistic choices. Could they all be by the same forger? It is possible. A skilled artist working in historical styles might develop recognizable patterns, even when imitating different masters. And if Dr. Moreau had identified these patterns, she would have had evidence of a systematic forgery operation. Evidence that could destroy careers and cost millions of dollars in losses. The telephone rings, interrupting our analysis. It is Inspector Marcel Dubois, with an update on the official investigation. Henri, we have preliminary results from the autopsy. Dr. Moreau was indeed poisoned. Cyanide administered in what appears to have been a glass of wine. Wine? We found traces in a glass on her kitchen counter. The poison was mixed with an expensive Bordeaux, probably something she would not have hesitated to drink. Any fingerprints on the glass? Only hers, but the bottle was wiped clean, which suggests the killer was careful about evidence. What about the time of death? Between midnight and 2 in the morning. She'd been dead for several hours when you found her. This timeline is significant. Dr. Moreau left Villa Marguerite at 11 o'clock, which means she was killed within 3 hours of the dinner party. The killer either followed her home or was already waiting for her. Have you questioned the other guests? We are in the process. Jean-Luc Moreau claims he went directly home after the dinner and spent the evening reading. No alibi. What about the others? Professor Rousseau says he returned to his hotel and went to bed. The hotel staff confirms he was there, but he could have left and returned without being noticed. Madame Dubois? She claims she drove back to Monaco and spent the evening at her gallery, preparing for an exhibition. We are checking with her staff. And Petrov? He says he returned to his hotel and made several telephone calls to Russia. We are verifying the calls with the hotel records. So none of them have solid alibis. None that we can confirm independently. Any of them could have killed Dr. Moreau and returned home without being detected. After ending the call, I share the information with Beaumont. The lack of solid alibis means we cannot eliminate any of the suspects based on opportunity alone. We need to focus on motive, I say. Which of the guests would have the strongest reason for wanting Dr. Moreau dead? If our theory about the forgery operation is correct, then Jean-Luc would be the obvious choice, but the others could be involved as well. How? Professor Rousseau has the expertise to create convincing forgeries. His knowledge of Renaissance techniques is encyclopedic. But would he have the artistic skill? Émile was a painter before he became an academic. His early work showed considerable talent. What about Madame Dubois? Sylvie has the connections to sell questionable works through her gallery. She also has relationships with collectors who might not ask too many questions about provenance. And Petrov? Victor represents clients who have the resources to fund such an operation and the motivation to acquire works that might not be available through legitimate channels. The more we discuss the possibilities, the more complex the case becomes. Rather than a simple murder motivated by a single forgery, we may be dealing with an international conspiracy involving multiple participants with different roles and motivations. I want to examine the other works that Dr. Moreau questioned, I say. If we can establish a pattern of forgery, we may be able to identify the person or persons responsible. That will require access to private collections and auction house records, not easy to obtain without official authority. Then we will have to be creative in our approach. I spend the rest of the morning making telephone calls to contacts in the art world, trying to gather information about the pieces Dr. Moreau had questioned. The responses are revealing. Several collectors and dealers are reluctant to discuss specific works, and some refuse to speak with me at all. People are nervous, I tell Beaumont after completing the calls. Word of Dr. Moreau's death has spread quickly through the art community, and those with questionable works are becoming defensive, which suggests they have something to hide, or that they are simply being cautious. The art world is built on reputation and trust. Any suggestion of fraud can be devastating, even for innocent parties. By afternoon, I have compiled enough information to identify several patterns in the questioned works. Most were discovered within the past 5 years. All have similar provenance stories, and many were authenticated by the same small group of experts. Look at this, I say, showing Beaumont a chart I have created. 12 of the 15 works Dr. Moreau questioned were authenticated by either Jean-Luc Moreau's company or by Professor Rousseau in his capacity as an independent expert. And several were sold through galleries that have relationships with Madame Dubois, while others were purchased by collectors represented by Petrov's organization. It is as if they are all connected in a network designed to create, authenticate, and sell forgeries. But which one is the leader? Who is organizing this operation? Before Beaumont can answer, we are interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Marcel Dubois, who appears agitated and concerned. "Henri, we have a problem. Jean-Luc Moreau has disappeared." Disappeared? He failed to appear for his scheduled interview this afternoon. When we went to his apartment, we found it empty. Not just unoccupied, but cleared out. All his personal belongings are gone. When did he leave? Sometime during the night, according to his neighbors. They heard sounds of packing and moving, but thought nothing of it at the time. Any indication of where he went? None, but we did find something interesting in his apartment. Marcel produces a manila envelope from his briefcase, hidden behind a false panel in his closet. Take a look. The envelope contains photographs, dozens of them, showing paintings in various stages of creation and restoration. But these are not historical works being preserved. They are new paintings being artificially aged to appear centuries old. Mon Dieu, Beaumont whispers, examining the images. These show the forgery process in detail, including several works that Dr. Moreau had questioned. Marcel adds, it appears Jean-Luc Moreau was documenting his own criminal activities. Or someone else's, I observe. These photographs could be evidence that he was gathering against other members of the operation. You think he was not the leader? I think he may have been a participant who was planning to expose the others, which would give them a strong motive for eliminating him. But Dr. Moreau was the one who was killed. Perhaps they killed the wrong person. Or perhaps they killed Dr. Moreau to prevent her from corroborating Jean-Luc's evidence. Marcel studies the photographs more carefully. Some of these show works in progress. If we can locate the studio where they were created, we might find additional evidence. And possibly Jean-Luc himself, I add, if he is still alive. The discovery of the photographs changes the entire complexion of the case. Rather than a simple murder to cover up art fraud, we may be dealing with a complex conspiracy involving betrayal, blackmail, and multiple victims. We need to find that studio, I say, and we need to locate Jean-Luc Moreau before whoever killed Dr. Moreau decides to eliminate him as well. If they have not already done so, Marcel observes grimly. As we prepare to expand the investigation, I cannot shake the feeling that we are running out of time. If Jean-Luc Moreau has evidence that could expose the forgery operation, his life is in immediate danger, and if he is already dead, we may never uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. The art world, I am learning, is far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Behind the elegant galleries and sophisticated collectors lies a network of deception that reaches into the highest levels of the international art market. And at the center of this network, someone is willing to commit murder to protect their secrets. The question now is whether we can identify and stop them before they strike again. Chapter 5. The Artist's Studio. The photographs from Jean-Luc Moreau's apartment provide our first real breakthrough in understanding the scope of the forgery operation. Marcel has arranged for the police technical team to analyze the images, and their findings are both fascinating and disturbing. "Look at this," Marcel says, spreading enlarged photographs across the conference table at the Nice police station. These images show at least 6 different paintings in various stages of creation and artificial aging. I examine the photographs carefully, noting the sophisticated techniques being employed. The forger is clearly skilled, the brushwork is confident, the color choices are appropriate for the periods being imitated, and the aging process appears to be scientifically sophisticated. This is not the work of an amateur, I observe. Whoever created these pieces has extensive knowledge of historical painting techniques and access to period materials, Beaumont adds. The canvases, the pigments, even the frames appear to be authentic to their supposed periods, which suggests considerable resources and planning. Marcel notes, this is not a small-scale operation. One photograph in particular catches my attention. It shows a painting that appears to be identical to Beaumont's Leonardo, but in an earlier stage of completion. The composition is the same, but the technique is subtly different, more confident, more assured. "Beaumont, look at this image. Does this painting appear familiar?" He studies the photograph intently. "Mon Dieu, it is virtually identical to my Leonardo, but the execution is superior, which suggests that your painting may be a copy of this one, or that this one is the original and mine is the forgery." The implications are staggering. If Beaumont's painting is indeed a forgery, then he has been deceived as thoroughly as anyone else. But it also raises questions about who created the original and why multiple versions exist. "We need to find this studio," I say. "These photographs were taken recently. The lighting and equipment visible in the background are modern." "I have been thinking about that," Marcel replies. The technical team noticed something interesting about the backgrounds in these images. He produces a magnifying glass and points to details in several photographs. "Look at the windows in the background. The view shows a distinctive landscape. Hills, a church spire, what appears to be a vineyard. Provence? Possibly. But more specifically, the technical team believes they can identify the location based on these visual clues." "How?" "By comparing the landscape features with aerial photographs and topographical maps. If we can identify the church and the specific arrangement of hills, we should be able to locate the studio." This is exactly the kind of methodical police work that gives me confidence in Marcel's abilities. While I focus on the psychological aspects of the case, he handles the technical details with professional competence. "How long will this analysis take?" "A few hours at most. We have already narrowed the search to 3 possible locations in the hills north of Nice." While we wait for the location analysis, I decide to interview the remaining suspects more thoroughly. Professor Rousseau has agreed to meet with me at his hotel, and I am particularly interested in his reactions to the discovery of the forgery photographs. The Hotel Negresco, where Professor Rousseau is staying, represents the kind of old-world elegance that appeals to visitors who appreciate tradition and quality. The professor receives me in the hotel's salon, a room that perfectly captures the sophisticated atmosphere of the Belle Époque era. "Inspector Dubois," he says, rising from a leather armchair with the careful movements of someone whose body no longer matches his mental agility. "I understand there have been significant developments in the investigation." "Indeed, Professor. We have discovered evidence of an extensive art forgery operation, and Jean-Luc Moreau has disappeared." "Jean-Luc has disappeared? How extraordinary!" I study his reaction carefully. Professor Rousseau appears genuinely surprised by this news, but his academic training makes him skilled at controlling his expressions. "We found photographs in his apartment showing paintings being created and artificially aged. Some of these works are pieces that Dr. Moreau had questioned." "May I see these photographs?" I show him several of the images, watching his face for any signs of recognition or concern. His reaction is that of a scholar examining interesting but unfamiliar material. "Fascinating," he murmurs, studying the technical details. "The aging techniques are quite sophisticated. Whoever created these pieces has extensive knowledge of historical methods. Knowledge that you possess, Professor." "Indeed I do, but so do many others in the art world. These techniques are not secret. They are documented in numerous academic publications. But the practical application requires considerable skill." "True. Creating convincing forgeries is as much art as science." I decide to be more direct in my questioning. "Professor, did you know that Jean-Luc Moreau's authentication company had certified many of the works that Dr. Moreau questioned?" I was not aware of that specific connection, no. "And you have provided independent authentication for several of these pieces yourself?" I have provided opinions on many works over the years. If some of them later proved questionable, that is unfortunate, but not necessarily suspicious. Unless you were aware they were forgeries when you authenticated them. Professor Rousseau sets down the photographs and looks at me directly. "Inspector, are you suggesting that I have been involved in art fraud?" "I am exploring all possibilities, Professor. The financial stakes in this case are enormous, and Dr. Moreau's murder suggests that someone was desperate to protect their secrets. I can understand your suspicion, but I assure you that my involvement in authentication work has always been honest and professional." "Then perhaps you can help me understand something. These forgeries required not just artistic skill, but extensive knowledge of Renaissance techniques, access to period materials, and understanding of aging processes. Who in your professional circle would possess all these capabilities?" Professor Rousseau considers this question carefully. "The combination of skills you describe is quite rare. Most forgers specialize in particular aspects, artistic technique, or materials science or aging processes. To find someone who excels in all areas." "Yes? There is one person who comes to mind, a former student of mine who showed exceptional talent in both artistic creation and technical analysis." "What is this person's name?" "Sylvie Dubois." The revelation hits me like a physical blow. Madame Dubois, the elegant gallery owner who shares my surname, is Professor Rousseau's former student and a potential master forger. Tell me about her background. Sylvie was one of my most brilliant students at the Sorbonne. She had exceptional artistic talent and a natural understanding of historical techniques. Her doctoral dissertation on Renaissance painting methods was groundbreaking. What happened to her academic career? She left academia to enter the commercial art world. I always assumed it was for financial reasons. Gallery work is more lucrative than university teaching. But she maintained her interest in technical analysis. Oh, yes, Sylvie has continued to study historical techniques, and she has access to sophisticated equipment through her gallery connections. Equipment that could be used for creating forgeries? Equipment that could be used for many purposes, including forgery, yes. I thank Professor Rousseau for his cooperation and return to the police station with this new information. Marcel has news as well. The technical team has identified the location of the studio shown in the photographs. It is an old farmhouse about 30 kilometers north of Nice, he reports. The property belongs to a company registered in Monaco. What company? Dubois Fine Arts Limited. The pieces of the puzzle are falling into place with disturbing clarity. Madame Sylvie Dubois owns the property where the forgeries are being created. She has the technical knowledge to create them, and she has the gallery connections to sell them. We need to search that farmhouse immediately, I say. Already arranged. The search team is assembling now. And we need to locate Madame Dubois for questioning. Also arranged. She is supposedly at her gallery in Monaco, but we have not been able to reach her by telephone. As we prepare to leave for the farmhouse, I reflect on the complexity of the case. What began as a question about a single painting's authenticity has revealed an international art fraud operation involving multiple participants and millions of dollars in fraudulent sales. But there are still unanswered questions. If Madame Dubois is the master forger, what roles did the other suspects play? And most importantly, where is Jean-Luc Moreau, and is he still alive? The drive to the farmhouse takes us through some of the most beautiful countryside in Provence. Rolling hills covered with vineyards and olive groves stretch toward distant mountains, and ancient stone villages perch on hilltops like sentinels watching over the landscape. The farmhouse itself is isolated and well-maintained, with modern security features that seem out of place in the rural setting. Marcel's search team has already secured the perimeter and is preparing to enter the building. No signs of recent occupation, the team leader reports, but there are fresh tire tracks in the courtyard. How fresh? Within the past 24 hours. We enter the farmhouse carefully, not knowing what we might find. The ground floor appears to be a normal rural residence, but the upper floor has been converted into a sophisticated art studio and laboratory. The studio is extraordinary. Professional lighting, climate control, and ventilation systems create ideal conditions for artistic work. Easels hold paintings in various stages of completion, and workbenches are equipped with scientific instruments for analyzing and aging materials. Mon Dieu, Beaumont whispers, examining the works in progress. This is a master forger's workshop. The paintings are remarkable in their quality and variety. Renaissance portraits, Baroque landscapes, Impressionist studies, all created with skill that would fool most experts. But it is the technical equipment that truly impresses me. "Look at this," Marcel says, pointing to a sophisticated aging chamber. "This device can artificially age paintings using controlled heat, humidity, and chemical treatments." "And this," I add, examining a microscope connected to a computer system. "This equipment can analyze the composition of pigments and binding agents to ensure they match historical standards." We continue exploring the studio, documenting everything for evidence. In a filing cabinet, we find detailed records of the forgery operation, lists of completed works, sales records, and correspondence with buyers and authentication services. "This operation has been running for at least 5 years, Marcel observes, reviewing the records. "And the profits are enormous, over 20 million euros in documented sales, with probably much more in undocumented transactions," I add. But it is what we find in the basement that provides the most shocking discovery. Jean-Luc Moreau is there, bound and gagged but alive, hidden in a storage room behind a false wall. "Jean-Luc!" Beaumont exclaims as we free him. "Are you injured?" "No," he gasps, removing the gag. "But I have been here since yesterday morning. She said she would kill me if I tried to expose the operation." "She?" "Sylvie Dubois. She is the one behind everything. The forgeries, the authentication fraud, Dr. Moreau's murder." "Tell us what happened." Jean-Luc accepts a glass of water and begins his story. "I discovered the forgery operation about 6 months ago, when I was asked to authenticate one of Sylvie's pieces. The technical analysis revealed inconsistencies that suggested modern creation, but the documentation was perfect." "So you investigated further?" "Yes. I began collecting evidence, including the photographs you found in my apartment. I was planning to expose the entire operation." "But Sylvie discovered your investigation?" "She confronted me after the dinner party at Beaumont's villa. She knew that Dr. Moreau was becoming suspicious, and she was afraid that together we would expose her." "So she killed Dr. Moreau?" "She went to Catherine's apartment that night and convinced her to examine some additional documentation. The wine was poisoned. Catherine never suspected anything until it was too late. And then she came for you. The next morning, she forced me to come here at gunpoint, saying she needed time to decide what to do with me." "Where is she now?" "I do not know. She left yesterday evening and has not returned." Marcel immediately radios for additional units to search for Madame Dubois. "But I suspect she is already far from France, probably using one of the false identities that someone running such an operation would certainly maintain." "Jean-Luc," I say, "we need to understand the full scope of this operation. How many people were involved?" "Sylvie was the mastermind and the primary forger. She has extraordinary artistic talent and technical knowledge, but she needed others to help with authentication and sales." "Including you?" "I was manipulated into providing authentication for several pieces before I realized they were forgeries. Once I discovered the truth, I was trapped. She threatened to expose my involvement if I tried to leave the operation." "What about the others from the dinner party?" "Professor Rousseau was used occasionally for independent authentication, but I believe he was unaware of the fraud. Viktor Petrov represents clients who purchase works without asking too many questions about provenance. But I do not think he knew they were forgeries. And Auguste Beaumont? Auguste was a victim, like many others. Sylvie sold him the fake Leonardo knowing he would eventually seek authentication, which would provide her with information about how sophisticated the detection methods were becoming. The picture that emerges is of a brilliant and ruthless criminal who manipulated the entire art authentication system for her own profit. Madame Dubois created forgeries of exceptional quality, used her gallery connections to sell them, and manipulated experts into providing authentication when needed. But why did she kill Dr. Moreau? I asked. Surely she could have found other ways to handle the situation. Catherine was too close to exposing everything, Jean-Luc explains. She had identified patterns in the questioned works that would have led directly to Sylvie, and she was planning to publish her findings in an academic journal, which would have destroyed the entire operation and cost Sylvie millions of dollars in future profits. As we complete our examination of the farmhouse, I reflect on the complexity of the case. Madame Dubois created an operation that exploited every weakness in the art authentication system: the reliance on expert opinion, the difficulty of scientific analysis, the desire of collectors to believe in remarkable discoveries. But her greatest mistake was underestimating the dedication of people like Dr. Catherine Moreau, who valued truth more than profit and was willing to risk her reputation to expose fraud. "We will find her," Marcel assures me, as we prepare to leave the farmhouse. Interpol has been notified, and her photograph is being circulated to airports and border crossings throughout Europe. She is intelligent and well prepared, I warn. She has probably been planning her escape route for years. Perhaps, but she made one crucial error. What error? She allowed her emotions to override her judgment. If she had simply disappeared when Dr. Moreau began asking questions, she might have escaped. But she chose to commit murder instead, which brought the full weight of law enforcement down on her operation. As we drive back toward Nice, I consider the lessons of this case. The art world, with its enormous financial stakes and subjective judgments, provides fertile ground for sophisticated fraud. But it also attracts people of genuine expertise and integrity who are willing to defend the truth against those who would exploit it. Dr. Catherine Moreau died because she refused to be silenced by threats or intimidated by powerful interests. Her dedication to authenticity, in art and in life, ultimately exposed a criminal operation that had deceived collectors and institutions for years. It is a fitting tribute to her memory that the truth she died seeking has finally been revealed. Chapter 6. The Final Brushstroke. 3 weeks after the discovery of the forgery studio, I sit in my villa overlooking the Mediterranean, adding the final details to my case notes. The investigation has concluded with mixed results. We've exposed a major art fraud operation and solved Dr. Moreau's murder. But the mastermind has escaped justice. Madame Sylvie Dubois vanished completely after leaving Jean-Luc Moreau at the farmhouse. Despite extensive searches by Interpol and cooperation from law enforcement agencies throughout Europe, no trace of her has been found. She appears to have prepared her escape route carefully, probably maintaining false identities and financial resources in multiple countries. The forgery operation itself has been thoroughly dismantled. The farmhouse studio has been sealed as evidence, and the sophisticated equipment has been confiscated. More importantly, the detailed records found at the site have allowed authorities to identify dozens of forged works that are now being removed from circulation. The financial impact is enormous, Marcel tells me during one of his regular updates. Preliminary estimates suggest that over 50 million euros worth of fraudulent art has been sold through this operation. And the buyers? Most are cooperating with the investigation. They are victims as much as anyone else. They paid enormous sums for works they believed to be authentic. What about restitution? That will be complicated. Many of the works have been resold multiple times, and determining liability will require years of legal proceedings. The human cost of the operation is equally significant. Dr. Catherine Moreau's death has sent shock waves through the art authentication community, leading to calls for more rigorous standards and better protection for experts who question suspicious works. Jean-Luc Moreau has been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, though his reputation has been damaged by his association with the fraud. He has decided to leave the authentication business and return to academic research. I should have been more suspicious when the documentation was too perfect, he tells me during our final interview. In the art world, perfect provenance is often a sign of fraud rather than authenticity. Professor Rousseau has also been cleared of involvement, though he admits to being troubled by his unwitting participation in authenticating forged works. It is a sobering reminder that expertise can be manipulated, he reflects. We must be more careful about the assumptions we make and the evidence we accept. Viktor Petrov has returned to Russia, where he is reportedly helping authorities investigate the collectors who purchased forged works through his organization. The Russian art market, it appears, was particularly vulnerable to fraud due to the enormous sums being spent by newly wealthy collectors who lacked expertise in authentication. Auguste Beaumont has decided to donate his questionable Leonardo to a museum for further study. Scientific analysis has confirmed that while the painting is not by Leonardo himself, it is a remarkable work by a contemporary artist and has significant historical value. I would rather own an authentic work by an unknown master than a forgery attributed to a famous one, he tells me. This experience has taught me that truth is more valuable than reputation. As I complete my notes, I reflect on the lessons of this case. The art world's combination of enormous financial stakes, subjective judgments, and international scope creates ideal conditions for sophisticated fraud. But it also attracts people of genuine expertise and integrity who are willing to defend truth against those who would exploit it. The case has also reinforced my belief in the importance of patience and careful observation in investigation. The truth about Madame Dubois' operation was hidden in plain sight, in the patterns of questioned works, the connections between authentication services, and the subtle inconsistencies in documentation. But it required careful analysis and the willingness to look beyond surface appearances to uncover the full scope of the fraud. Most importantly, the case has reminded me that behind every crime, No matter how sophisticated or international in scope, are human beings making choices between right and wrong. Dr. Catherine Moreau chose truth over safety and paid with her life. Madame Sylvie Dubois chose profit over integrity and became a fugitive from justice. The telephone rings, interrupting my reflections. It is Marcel with news that both surprises and concerns me. Henri, we have received a report that may interest you. A woman matching Sylvie Dubois' description was seen boarding a yacht in Monaco 3 days ago. A yacht? Whose yacht? That is the interesting part. The yacht is registered to a company owned by the Pemberton family. Lord Pemberton? The same Pemberton who is mentioned in Auguste's correspondence about his consulting work? The same. It appears there may be connections between this case and other criminal activities in the international art world. Where was the yacht headed? The Mediterranean, but the specific destination is unknown. The yacht has not been seen since leaving Monaco. This development suggests that Madame Dubois' escape may have been facilitated by other members of an international criminal network. The art world, it appears, harbors more secrets than we have yet uncovered. Marcel, I think we may need to expand our investigation beyond this single case. I was thinking the same thing. There are indications that the forgery operation was connected to other criminal activities, money laundering, stolen art trafficking, possibly even more serious crimes. Then our work is not finished. No, Henri. I suspect it is just beginning. As I end the call, I walk to my study and place Auguste Beaumont's original invitation next to the others in my collection. Each postcard, each letter, each formal invitation represents a moment when someone reached across the distance between strangers to request my help. This particular invitation led to one of the most complex cases of my career, but it also opened my eyes to a world of crime that extends far beyond the French Riviera. The art world, with its international scope and enormous financial stakes, provides cover for criminal activities that span continents and involve some of the most sophisticated criminals I have ever encountered. Madame Sylvie Dubois may have escaped justice for now, but her operation was just one part of a larger network that continues to operate in the shadows of the legitimate art market. I make a mental note to research the Pemberton family and their connections to the international art trade. If Marcel is correct about the expanding scope of criminal activity in this world, then Dr. Catherine Moreau's death may be just the beginning of a much larger investigation. But for now, I am content to sit in my villa and watch the sunset over the Mediterranean. The case of the Villa Marguerite has been solved, justice has been served for Dr. Moreau's murder, and a major fraud operation has been exposed. These are significant accomplishments, even if the mastermind has escaped. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new mysteries. The art world will continue to attract both those who genuinely appreciate beauty and those who seek to exploit it for profit. And somewhere in that world, Madame Sylvie Dubois is probably already planning her next operation, confident that her skills and connections will protect her from the consequences of her crimes. But she has made one crucial error in her calculations. She has underestimated the determination of those who value truth over profit and justice over convenience. Dr. Catherine Moreau died defending these principles, and her death has inspired others to continue the fight against fraud and deception in the art world. The investigation may be over, but the larger battle for authenticity and integrity continues. And I suspect that before long, another invitation will arrive, another postcard will be added to my collection, and another mystery will draw me back into the dangerous and fascinating world of international art crime. As I prepare for bed, I notice a small envelope that has been slipped under my door. Inside is a postcard showing the harbor at Cannes, with a brief message written in elegant script. "The game continues, Inspector. Some secrets are worth more than life itself. A friend." The postcard is unsigned, but the handwriting looks familiar. I compare it to samples from the case files and confirm my suspicion. It is from Madame Sylvie Dubois. She is still out there, still playing her dangerous game, and she wants me to know it. The message is both a taunt and a warning. She has escaped this time, but she expects our paths to cross again. I add the postcard to my collection and make a note in my case file. The investigation of the Villa Marguerite forgery operation may be closed, but the larger story is far from over. Somewhere in the shadows of the international art world, Madame Dubois is planning her next move, confident in her ability to stay one step ahead of justice. But she has made one crucial miscalculation. She has revealed herself to be not just a criminal, but a killer, willing to murder to protect her secrets. This changes everything about how she must be pursued and captured. The next time our paths cross, and I am certain they will, I will be ready for her. The game, as she says, continues. But she should remember that in any game, there are winners and losers, and the final outcome is never certain until the last move is played. For now I am content to wait and watch. The Mediterranean night is peaceful, the stars are bright, and tomorrow will bring whatever mysteries it chooses to reveal. In my experience, patience is often the most powerful weapon in the pursuit of truth. And truth, as Dr. Catherine Moreau proved with her life, is always worth pursuing, no matter how dangerous the journey or how powerful the forces arrayed against it. The case of death at the Villa Marguerite is closed, but the story it began will continue, and when it does, I will be ready. 6 months later, I receive a telephone call from Inspector Marcel Dubois with news that both vindicates our investigation and opens new avenues of inquiry. Henri, you will be interested to know that Sylvie Dubois has been arrested. Where? London. She was attempting to sell a supposedly newly discovered Monet to a private collector. But the buyer became suspicious and contacted Scotland Yard. And they connected her to our case? Through Interpol, yes. She is being extradited to France to face charges for Dr. Moreau's murder. Excellent news, but I suspect this is not the end of the story. You are correct. During her arrest, she was carrying documents that suggest connections to other criminal operations throughout Europe. The Pemberton family you mentioned appears to be involved in a network that spans from London to St. Petersburg. Art fraud? Art fraud, money laundering, and possibly more serious crimes. Scotland Yard has asked for our assistance in a joint investigation. When do we begin? Next week. Pack your bags, Henry. We are going to London. As I prepare for this new adventure, I reflect on how one dinner invitation led to the exposure of an international criminal network. The art world, it appears, harbors secrets that reach into the highest levels of society and span continents. But that, as they say, is another story entirely.